So I'm Mark Jaquith, or according to Southwest Airlines, I am Mark the Jaquith, or the Mark Jaquith. I'm not sure how you read that. Yeah, actually my middle name's Theodore, so that's just fortuitous truncation. So I'm one of the lead developers of the WordPress core, and I want to talk to you about secure coding with WordPress. So the short version is that most people are not doing this very well at all. Outside of like the first tier of WordPress developers, almost everyone, even some people that you think of as the big names, they're often getting this wrong. So we have a couple problems here. One is just the lack of awareness. People aren't aware of the security issues that are possible with web apps and how to fix them in WordPress. And another problem, which is a little worse, is apathy. They say, yeah, they're issues, but they're small issues and they're not a big deal, right? So my goals here, I want to teach you how to thwart 3 common attacks. Actually, I think that was shortened to 2 in this one, I'm not sure. Give you 3 useful principles for web security and some common mistakes to avoid. So the first principle is to escape late. And by that I mean when you have some data and you need to escape it for something, say a SQL query, don't do it up here and then have code and then use an escape version down here. Because when you're trying to audit and see, okay, have I covered my bases, it won't be clear to you that when you're using it in a dangerous context, you've escaped it way up here. So instead, do it right when you're going to use it. That way you look at it and you say, this is a dangerous context, but I've taken care of it. It's all in the same line. The next principle is that there's really no such thing as just escaping. It's all about escaping within a context. So you have your raw data, and it can be escaped for SQL contexts, for HTML contexts. Probably the most common vector is called cross-site scripting. And the idea here is that a malicious third party is able to inject code or trick you into injecting code, JavaScript code, into a website. That's their malicious code. And at that point, they essentially own the browser, and they can do anything that you, as the browser user, can do. The traditional one is to steal your cookies, and then they have your login session. But there are much worse things they can also do. So by itself, it's sort of viewed as some people think of it as a minor threat, but it can be really be leveraged into worse attacks. So here would be an example. You have an H1 tag, and you have your title that is somehow being dynamically generated. If there is any way for them to change that variable, you'd be in trouble here, because they can just stick in, opening script tag and arbitrary JavaScript, and boom. So, third principle, anything that isn't hard-coded is suspect. So, because here we had a variable, that's suspect. You should look at that, see a variable inside of HTML, and be saying, okay, where's that coming from? So, anything that isn't hard-coded. But even better, with a typo, is just everything is suspect. So, even if you know that title is being hard-coded somewhere else, it may be the case in version 1 that's hard-coded, but maybe you add an option in version 2 and it becomes something that is changeable. So you almost want to be paranoid there. So the way to take care of this in WordPress is super simple. Don't pay attention to number 3. That's the way to just do translation and escaping in one go. But the base is ESC _ and then the context. So here ATTR means attribute. So that'd be like an HTML or XML attribute. So title equals quotes, and then you're echoing out some data in there. We have escape HTML. So that's what you would have used in that H1 context. We have escape attribute. Again, HTML attributes. We have escape URL. So escape attribute keeps them from like putting in a double quote and jumping out of that attribute and then doing on click equals whatever. But for URLs, we also have to look at the protocol. So there's the JavaScript pseudo protocol where you can do JavaScript : arbitrary JavaScript. So this helps you protect against that. And WordPress has a bunch of whitelisted protocols. All the usual ones that you use, plus the ones you haven't used since the 80s, like Gopher, are all in that whitelist. And if you want a URL that's clean but doesn't have the ampersands encoded, HTML encoded, you can use escape URL raw. Escape.js is for JavaScript. We're using PHP to echo out a variable into JavaScript. So for example, there's some JavaScript and we're trying to get something from PHP and echo it out. Use escape.js there, and that takes care of the JavaScript. And lastly, we have escape text area, which is similar to escape HTML, except it always double encodes. So you always get back what you put in. All right, so what those things do, for example, in the HTML context, is they HTML encode everything. So if you have, say, strong tags or something, they'll actually get encoded to the ampersand, LT, semicolon, etc. But if you want to allow some HTML in, but just safe HTML, you're going to use one of these functions here. WordPress uses a library called Cases, and the two of these are only different in that data is stricter. So the data would allow things that WordPress usually lets go through comments, so links, strong, italic, but not, say, images, and certainly not scripts or anything like that. And then post would be what you can put in as a post author, which is a little bit more expanded. The next attack is called CSRF, cross-site request forgery. This is a sort of a tricky concept. So say you have a web form that updates something, and if it's not protected, anyone could put that form on a different website, like a malicious website, and point to the same handler, right? Because they're just taking the form, putting it somewhere else, but submitting it to your site, and your site, without protection, would just handle this as if it had come from within the site. So even if you have to be logged in to do something, when that third-party site sends that form over to your site, you're still logged in. Your cookies and your authorization are still good. So it's really an issue of authorization versus intention. So you're authorized to do that action, but you didn't intend to. They sort of tricked you into it. Example I like to use is, you know what RFID is, right? It's like a short-range radio identification, like the little key cards, you know? So instead of actually sticking it into the door, you just sort of wave it near the sensor, right? So that's my authorization. That says I'm allowed to go through that door. But what could happen with the key in my pocket is I could just walk by the door and accidentally open it, right? So I didn't intend to open it. So that's sort of what CSRF is about. And the way we do this is something called nonces. Essentially, it's a secret key, and that key is locked down to the action you're performing. The object, it's locked down to your specific user account, and it's time limited. So just think of this as a unique string that takes all these things into account. Say if you're deleting post number 32 as user Mark on the 24th of September, that it would be specific to that. So even if someone intercepted that key, it would only be useful for that specific, deleting that specific post, and only for a 12 to 36 hour window. So, right, talked about that. And it's pretty simple to use. All you have to do is stick this into the form field that you're generating, and that'll generate a hidden field with that key. And then on the back end, you check it. There it is in the form, right? I can go top or bottom as long as it's somewhere in the form. And then on the back end, you check it, passing in the same string. You don't need to check the result of that if you just do it before you've actually outputted any HTML. And if that fails, they'll get a, did you mean to do this page. So you still need to make sure that they're authorized to do it. This only takes care of intention. So those two things work in tandem. So I do a lot of WordPress code auditing for plugin authors and for theme developers, and I see lots of stupid stuff that is repeated over and over and over. So do you know what eval does? Eval takes a string and then executes PHP code in it. So you could pass in a string to this that included any arbitrary PHP and it would execute it. So obviously if you have any user-controlled data in there, you have to be very, very careful about sanitizing it. So I like to say, unless you're omniscient, don't use this because you will make a mistake. I had a friend come to me the other day. He had a problem that was solved, he thought, more elegantly by using eval, and he said, everyone I show this to says, that sounds like a bad idea in practice, but I can't find the issue. I found it in about 15 minutes. So it's one of these things where you're never going to cover all the bases, and you just really should stay away from that. Next, people tend to trust that the server superglobals in PHP are secure and safe to use, but they definitely aren't. I don't know if you see the problem there, but that's the request URI. Someone can just stick a double quote onto the end of it, and they've jumped out of that action, and they do a cross-site scripting attack. So let's see who's been paying attention. What would I use here to escape that? Escape URL, yeah. Escape attribute would also work because there's no way that I know of to exploit, like with the JavaScript pseudo protocol in action. But since it is going to be a URL, then yeah, escape URL would be the one I'd use here. That has insecure?
No, secure examples.
At the end, I have a sort of generic example, but we can jump into more complex ones if we have time. Oh yeah, here's my quiz. So you have a bunch of context here. You have an href attribute, you have a title attribute, you have some text that's in between HTML, and then you have JavaScript. So how would I fix this? My first one is the URL, right? Href. So escape URL. Title is just the non-URL HTML attribute, so that's just escape attribute or ATTR. The next one's in just a generic HTML context, so I would use escape HTML. And then the last one is JavaScript, so escape JS. So all you need to remember is just escape in the context. It's JavaScript HTML attribute URL. And that would look like this. So it's really just, there's nothing tricky about this. All you need to know is you need to be able to recognize the contexts. So be able to tell the difference between title equals and href equals. Well, that href expects a URL. So now that you know, if you see this like in your theme code or your plugin code, this should stand out, or something like this should stand out like a sore thumb, that they're definitely doing it wrong. All right, so I went fast because I was behind. So we can do questions or we can talk code, yeah?
So is this like the unsecure code, is that typically what you're seeing in themes like all over?
Yeah.
All the free themes and what are themes that people purchase, like say Fuses or other framework themes?
So a few of the frameworks I've audited. I've audited the Genesis framework, which is fairly popular and up-and-comer. I audited Woo framework, which is the framework that Woo Themes bases all their themes off of. So those are in good shape now. But they did have issues. Both of them had serious issues.
So do you typically find this dubbed inside, and, just something that's overlooked, like most of it's good, and then there's like a little piece of code somewhere next to it? Or is it all over?
Let's see. Hold on here. Let me mirror this here. What is?
So the actual themes that WordPress has on WordPress.com and WordPress.org are not secure?
The ones that are on WordPress.org almost certainly are secure. The theme review team is fairly meticulous about that. It's generally more the third party and the premium ones that are a little bit lacking because they don't go through that WordPress.org theme review team. With plugins, there aren't enough man hours to, because plugins can be huge, much bigger than, and more complex than themes. So we can't guarantee. If we find out that one is insecure,
Is that what happened when WordPress got compromised earlier this year?
what happened there, you're talking about WordPress.org?
I'm on com.
On .com. That was a separate issue. I think someone probably just got their password sniffed over Wi-Fi or something. We had an issue on WordPress.org where some developers had their WordPress.org accounts compromised, again, probably Wi-Fi, and people used their credentials to update their plugins with some malicious code. Yeah, but so when we find out about these things, we're fairly good at reacting. So you asked, the question was what the sorts of things I see. So I see a lot of when people do options forms. Pretend that's type equals text. I see that a lot. This is more of an issue on a multi-site because obviously you hopefully it's protected where you need to have certain level of privileges to update that option. But say like on WordPress.com where it's more of a locked down environment and where you couldn't just compromise your own blog, you could compromise someone else's blog that's also on WordPress.com. That would be an issue there. So I'd have a text input and then I just put the cross-site scripting code into that option and update it, and that would execute. So that'd be stored cross-site scripting. So again, you would do this I see all the time. So I would do that. I see super globals used a lot in form. Server or whatever, PHP self, one of those ones, I see that a lot. And then I see a lot of forms that aren't protected against CSRF, that intention protection.
So how do you log this stuff? You just start with variables and just search.
I have some, where did I put it? I have some awesome regular expressions that sort of, eventually you do have to sort of go through it by hand, but when I do my broad sweeps, I use something like this. And this doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem. This is more of a whitelist, so this is pretty crazy regular expression, but I'm looking for style, value, name, ID, or title equals a starting quote. We're echoing something out, and then it's not using escape attribute or absent, which is a WordPress function to do a positive absolute integer, int val, escape URL, or casting to integer. So that'll show me all places that are suspect. I put this into TextMate. I open the project, so on command line I do mate, dot, if I'm in the project, and then I do a project-wide regular expression. And this one actually is cool because I have the replacement right here. So I can literally put that in, and even the ones that they're suspicious but not necessarily bad, it's okay, I can still fix them, and if the fix wasn't necessary, it won't do any harm. It'll just be a redundant fix. So yeah, I can take search for that, and then it does the replacement. Essentially, all it's doing is it's number 5, I think, is right here. Just grabbing that. So it takes everything that they did that didn't start with the just whitelist and things, and it just wraps it into the same attribute. It is the same thing for URL context, page traffic, or hash. So I mean, this gets me a decent amount of the way. Obviously, this radio expression doesn't get everything. Sometimes people are concatenating in weird ways that I can't really grab. But I'll look at all their echoes, all their get option calls, and then for the last sweep, I'll essentially have to go through it line by line to see what this is. But this will get me started with this. Apologies.
So you just do that with find templates.
Yeah.
So that covers a lot of business.
Yep. Yeah. It should be noted that actually WordPress itself doesn't pass this. The ones that it doesn't pass aren't an issue. Again, this doesn't mean that it's necessarily an issue. But it's a good indicator. And I actually want to get WordPress passing that because it would be nice to build up on that and be like, okay, we're waiting on that. The other thing to look for, I look for left angle bracket opening form. I just check all the forms. I look for the authorization retention checks there. I look at all the form elements that are being populated. I didn't talk about SQL because I didn't have time. And I'll look at all the SQL calls. So the $WPPP, look at all those calls. Make sure they're not sticking in user variables without sanitizer or without escaping them first.
Just a basic, you're echoing basic WordPress function. Is that already staged out?
That's sort of a minefield. I can't give you, like some of them are and some of them aren't. Honestly, just look at the get body info function and then the filters that are attached to that. Trying to take care of most of them are taken care of. But again, the way these functions work, like escape attribute, with HTML escaping, it doesn't always take it to the next level. So you know how you have an ampersand, it goes to ampersand AMP semicolon, and you code it again, it goes ampersand AMP semicolon AMP semicolon, and it just keeps adding on. These functions protect against that. They only take it from level 0, which is just ampersand, to level 1, which is ampersand AMP semicolon. You again stay at that level. So that means you can run it multiple times, or you can run it, you're not sure it was run earlier. So that's why I use that line. And I know it's not going to mess anything up. Exactly. Yep.
And just underscore, that's on there.
Yeah, so you do underscore to any of these escape functions, you can do underscore E or underscore underscore. And those are just the WordPress translation functions. So if you have your plugin theme is internationalized so that can be displayed in other languages, that just saves you from having to nest that around there. So that's almost a level of paranoia to escaping on like a static string that's translated, because you're just protecting against the translator being malicious, but it doesn't hurt.
Search for emails too.
Yes, I search for evals. I don't find many of those in themes, but sometimes more complex plugins feel that I mean, sometimes it does save you some coding lines. Not worth it. We had some in WordPress, and we look at them and we get smart 10 people we know. We look at them like, no, that's very limited. It has to be safe. I'm like, no, just get rid of them. Even if it's more code, it's just not worth the risk. It's also a performance detriment. Because you can't, PHP can't recompile and optimize that code and keep it on cache. So that just means it's faster to have an actual function that